Welcome, crypto enthusiasts, to the Independent Reserve Podcast. We're joined by industry leaders and experts to keep you informed, entertained, and on top of the latest trends in the world of crypto.
All right, we're back. The Independent Reserve Podcast with Hannah Glass, a real OG in this space, and of course, Jonathan Toro. Let's get into it. Hannah, I have to start with your resume, of course. But last week we had Joni Perovic online, and I gave her some credit and said, I think you're one of the first lawyers, and she mentioned you as being the actual OG.
Thank you. That's very kind. I would say I am one of the earliest lawyers in this space in Australia. But if I'm going to talk about the OG, there's actually OGs. There were kind of four of us at the early stage, and that was Amor Sexton, Ruben Brahmanathan, and Johan Ottensouza. And out of all of those, I'm the only one that's still a lawyer.
Yeah, right. There's some good names. Good names. As a lawyer, so I've got to do the introduction. So you're a lawyer, so everyone knows you now as a senior associate from King, Wood & Mallesons, but you've got a great career before that. We were with Herbert Smith and Freehills and also DLA Piper, so you've been everywhere. Right now, I know are you still in the steering committee and chair of the RegTech working group? That's still going on?
No, it isn't. That was part of the policy, sort of a previous formation of Department of Industry. But what that was the National Blockchain Roadmap was established to explore opportunities to develop the use cases for blockchain across Australia. And actually what they were doing is looking at where can the technology be used outside of financial services and what is out there. And primarily from a government perspective, what are the barriers to adopting it? What is standing in our way of actually using this underlying technology? Now, I can talk about the huge amount of work that went into that. There were 4 working groups. It brought together a whole lot of people from all across industry. I chaired the RegTech working group, which was specifically looking at legal, regulatory and compliance, and the use of blockchain in those use cases. But the main takeaway from all of it is actually blockchain, when you look at it as a foundational technology, has an incredibly broad number of use cases. The barriers are less than we think from a legal or a regulatory perspective outside of financial services, but there's a lot more that needs to happen for it to be adopted. Mm-hmm. And I think that's something which we've seen across the industry is perhaps going back a few years where we were talking about blockchain, all the things, we've sort of moved away from that because there's now a better understanding of what the technology is, how it works, and what that means it is good at solving, and also what it doesn't solve, which is a fundamentally important part of the adoption of any new technology.
So safe to say you've been in it from the start, and you know you're doing a lot of work in getting this stuff off the ground and making it mainstream and helping the industry. So we're going to jump into what you've seen over the period of time since you've been in it, because I'm sure you've got some fascinating insights into how things have changed and developed and are progressing. But I have to quickly also mention, I know you're also a mum, so you're keeping yourself very busy, and you're an English teacher at one point.
Yes. Wow, you've got delving way into my past. When I was on exchange in France for a year, I did spend part of my time teaching English to high schoolers. And I have an enormous amount of respect for teachers out there. It showed me that, law is hard, blockchain is hard, but teaching kids is like way up there.
All right. All right, so we have to go back. First of all, about you. So, you've been a lawyer forever and an English teacher, but you had to get into it somewhere. Let's talk there. What got you into this space? What kind of took you from being a lawyer and going, hey, there's this new technology and we've got to get stuck into it, and becoming a lawyer in the space?
So it's a really interesting question. Part of it was just a general nerdy curiosity. And it started not just with blockchain, or really Bitcoin as it was, because that was the industry. It actually was around where are the gaps in the law. And it all started with a meetup, as a lot of this stuff does. And it wasn't a blockchain or a Bitcoin meetup. It was actually a meetup around equity crowdfunding. This was in 2013, the very first inquiry into a sort of fintechy type subject by then CAMAC, which is a government body that no longer exists. But they were looking at how can we facilitate equity crowdfunding in Australia. And the result of that was, well, actually, there needs to be a change in the law. Now, I went to this meetup, found it quite interesting, had a bit of spare time because I was a baby lawyer at the stage and had just actually finished a particular project, and so decided it was a good idea to look into this. As a result of looking into that, writing a very poor response to government on that, I then met Amor Sexton, who I mentioned before. Amor then was a lawyer working in this space. She's now actually the COO of Block Demon.
Okay.
So, as I said, no longer a lawyer, but still heavily invested in this space and absolutely phenomenal person. She said, well, if you're interested in where are those gaps in the law where people are innovating and doing different things, what do you think about Bitcoin? And I was actually working in financial services at the time. I said, well, that's really interesting because I've been looking at payments and new payment systems like M-Pesa. I've been doing a little bit of looking at things like derivatives and schemes and all these other financial products. Bitcoin kind of fits within that, but it doesn't. She said, well, why did you come along to this other meetup called Bitcoin Professionals? Because we're getting a whole load of people together to actually examine these issues because people are trying to use Bitcoin to make payments and they're coming up against all of these legal issues. I went, yeah, that sounds like fun. Got a bit of spare time. And so I went to this meetup and there were maybe 20 people around the room, including 4 lawyers, and we each kind of had separate specialties. Amor was in the startup space. I was financial services. Ruben was tax. And Jan was in sort of more banking. And the 4 of us were kind of sitting there listening to a lot of devs, because it was just devs at that stage, talk about how they wanted to buy beer at the pub with Bitcoin and they were being taxed twice.
They just didn't want to get taxed, huh?
Well, it was more, they're like, I'm paying GST when I buy the Bitcoin. I'm paying GST on my beer. Come on, this doesn't make sense. If I'm just using money, I just pay the GST on my beer.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really where it started. And so there was a whole conversation around, well, how does Bitcoin fit in the existing tax framework? Now, I'm not a tax lawyer. And I sat there going, I'm not a tax lawyer at all. But listening to this conversation, and then it moved from not just tax, but into money laundering and anti-money laundering provisions. And how do people who are doing things like operating exchanges actually meet their obligations under our laws to prevent money laundering and terrorism financing, which are still issues to this day in the industry. And that was where it started to get closer to my area of expertise. And then the conversation moved on to things like smart contracts and is Bitcoin money? And as soon as those two topics of conversations came up, I went, oh. And I was like, no, I'm not going to say anything. Not going to say anything. The youngest person in this room. And I couldn't help myself. Because there were a whole lot of developers around the room saying, law doesn't matter. Smart contract is the contract. That's all that matters. We need to follow the contract. And then on the other side, they were saying, well, but Bitcoin's got to be treated like money, and money's a special thing. And so why do we even need to worry about all of these other legal issues? And I kind of sat there and went, actually, that is one way to look at it if you're focusing on the technology. But the way that our laws are written is much broader than that. It's principles-based. So if you're looking at, say, is Bitcoin money? Well, you've got to go back to what are the actual properties of money? And it didn't quite fit. And then that was the beginning of the first Senate inquiry into what is Bitcoin, which has laid the foundation for the development of our laws in this space in Australia. That was in 2014, the paper published in 2015. On the smart contract side, it also made me realize, well, there might be a link between smart contracts and legal contracts, and trying to work out what is that link, where might it be, why might you want to use a smart contract, this automatable, coded form of a contract, and why might you sometimes need to have hopefully less than 200 pages written down but maybe 10 to 20 pages of written language. And why might you want to put some terms in coded, and why might you want to put some terms in natural language? And thus began the next phase of my career. And I effectively said, yes, I'm a financial services lawyer, but the vanguard of financial services is actually the intersection of financial services and technology. And pushing the boundaries of that, that's blockchain, smart contracts, Bitcoin. And then as Ethereum emerged as well, it was pretty clear that there is so much more that can be done here. And it was really about working through all of those different issues as they've come up through the years. And so my career transitioned from basic payment systems, pure derivatives and pure schemes to where it is now, which is everything in the fintech world. But a lot of stuff, particularly in blockchain.
All right, so that's a pretty comprehensive, I guess, summary of where the laws started in Australia to where they've got to now for someone who's been in it the whole time. So, I mean, you've been in it since day one, effectively.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
It is pretty cool, actually.
And do you still go to meetups? Has the community changed?
I don't go to meetups as much as I used to, which is a real shame. It has changed. The number of people there has changed. It's certainly not 20 ragtag people who are kind of doing it as their side hustle. Most people do it as their main job now, which is awesome. I think it's also shifted a little bit in that it was a couple of lawyers and devs to all sorts of different people with different areas of expertise, including things like, as you know, markets, marketing, PR, consulting, accountancy, and you need that for a broad ecosystem that's actually going to support a real business in this space. So that's really cool. But I think also Australia is actually always been in a pretty cool position for blockchain because we do have that depth of developer talent here. I think that continues, and that part of that's due to some of the OGs and from a dev perspective, people like Bocky, who's been there since day one.
Yeah, fascinating.
I assume the conversation is still around, how to buy beer with Bitcoin.
Have we got an answer to can you buy beer?
Well, we changed the law.
Okay.
So that was the changes to the GST Act to amend it so that Bitcoin can be treated like money in certain circumstances. And the idea was so that when you were actually using Bitcoin as a means of making payment, and it's not just Bitcoin, it's others that fall within the definition of digital currency, then it's to be treated the same way as money. But it's also written in a certain way that we understand that when you're not using Bitcoin to make payments, you're kind of using it to buy and store and invest and see it, the value grow over time, or even speculate on markets, then that's a different use case and so it might be treated differently. Again, not a tax lawyer, so it's a very kind of high-level view.
Oh, imagine if we had a tax lawyer like Harry Dell.
Oh, I know. It would be brilliant because he would know exactly how it works.
It's funny you should mention Harry Dell because look who we've got. Harry, great to see you.
Thank you. I was just passing by and thought I'd drop in.
What are the chances?
What are the chances?
You happen to be walking by. Harry, well, great to have you along halfway through our show. I'm glad you could find our office, I guess.
I found both offices today. So.
Harry, let me do a quick intro. We just got through Hannah's story. It was fantastic. We just termed her the godmother of crypto law in Australia. So we'll have to come up with a term for you as well. But Harry, everyone knows you as the director from Cadena Legal. You also probably, I don't know, maybe people also know you as the co-founder of the JubiDAO. Have I got pronounced that correct?
Yes, but JubiDAO's actually merged into another company.
All right. We'll have to get into that.
Talk about that.
Previously senior associate with Chamberlain's Law.
Yep.
You're a fellow Canberra.
No, actually,
working there.
that is Sydney office. So
at a Sydney office. Okay, well, scratch that off the tape then. Senior tax consultant at Kelly Partners, but also I think a lot of people would be fascinated to know you were a tax specialist at the ATO for a number of years.
Yes.
Hence, I guess, your speciality in tax. But importantly, before all of that, before all of the lawyering, You're the site manager at Majestic Cinemas.
I can see you've been through my LinkedIn profile, Lee.
What do you mean?
Yeah, like that's where I started. It started in customer service, and I have to say that was what jumped me into the ATO job. And you wouldn't think so, but I'm interviewing with a whole bunch of other, law, commerce grads, and the differentiator was I had very deep customer service experience, which is what the public service really wanted, and that's how I accidentally got a job in tax law. I didn't mean to.
Tax law is a dark art, though. So
I didn't even know that at the time. I was happy for a paying job, and I was like, this tax does all right. So I was actually considering a non-paying pro bono commercial law in movie sort of position. It sounded cool, but then I realized that it actually wasn't that exciting, and I probably should go with a paying job. And I did, and I think I'm pretty happy with that decision.
Good move. Good move. Well, just in time to answer the question that Hannah posed earlier. So day one, Hannah's discovered Bitcoin, and some developers come up to her and say, hey, why can't I just buy some beer in Bitcoin?
Yeah.
Turns out there's a bunch of stuff that's actually, a challenge with that, which we've been through, but there's some tax implications as well. So throw you on the spot. Why can't I just buy my beer with Bitcoin?
Why can't I be that easy? Well, first of all, the vendor's got to accept Bitcoin. We've got trouble with vendors even accepting cash. So Bitcoin has got to be integrated into our current payment systems. But apart from that, when you're buying beer, you're paying GST. How are they going to pay the GST? They've got to sell the Bitcoin. So you've still got this AUD connection. We've still got practical issues in making it happen. There's no reason that can't. It's just we need to work through those issues. And vendors have to accept that method of payment. And it has to be sort of generally endorsed by a government to some extent. And we're not quite there yet.
Not quite there yet.
Yeah.
Does that answer our question? I think it does.
yeah, I think it does. It's actually really fascinating when you look at the link between payments and the innovation in payments more broadly and digital assets. And on the one hand, you've got Bitcoin, which was created as an electronic peer-to-peer means of payment. And if you look at where it is now, it's not really living up to that. And part of it is just because the value is so high and no one wants to be buying beer at the pub when they know that in a year's time or even a month's time, that beer is not worth $10. It's actually worth 100.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, everyone wants Bitcoin to go up that much, but that's kind of the problem with it. It's not a great unit of account. And that was actually where we came to with that sort of earlier Senate review is it doesn't fit those properties of money. It's not a great unit of account. It's not a great store of value. And it's not a great means of exchange because, as you say, it's not widely accepted as a means of making payment. What you do find, though, and I think you've touched on a really interesting point, is how do we make payments? What do we actually do? And most of the time, there are other payment systems that we use. So what we're actually seeing is people creating structures where they say, well, I've got this Bitcoin or some other crypto asset or digital asset in my wallet. The merchant wants to receive Aussie dollars. So let's create a system that allows me on my end to pay with that digital asset, but the merchant to receive AUD. And that's where you have these wallets that are established that allow you to effectively exchange your digital asset for AUD such that the merchant receives that. There are a number of different players involved in making that happen. And I don't just mean devs building different systems. I mean, actually, each of those systems might have its own rules, particularly if what we're seeing now is where the payment runs through a card system. But what we're actually also seeing is that's kind of where this is going. It's actually that intersection of digital assets and traditional finance. And payments is where the rubber really hits the road at the moment. And if we want to talk about the next wave of regulation and reform, digital assets and payments are hand in glove.
And it sounds like that reform has to come about to achieve the principal utility of what cryptocurrency is. It gives the consumer an ability to come out and use their cryptocurrency and be accepted by a merchant and be able to perform the utility of transacting for goods and services. Sounds like that definition of the legal framework has to be ironed out to allow for that utility. Is that broadly? the way you view it and what has to be achieved?
Let's there's things the government's interested in, and it's protecting consumers and enabling consumers to use their funds how they want. The government is pretty critical of things like debanking and, very positive on consumer protection, scam protection, all sorts of things. So if they can make those guide rails happen, that's what they're interested in doing. That looks like the next, 1 and 2 steps that's going to happen in the industry. And it sucks for me because I just wish for some tax reform, but we're not even talking about it. So I wish we could talk about it, but it doesn't exist.
And this seems to be the real state of things at the moment. Like, we've got a really good understanding of the technology now, and the industry overall has matured, and we think we have a pretty good concept of, I guess, the tax issues, but we haven't really kind of pulled it all together and made a sort of clear rule for everyone to then get on with implementing this in business. Is that sort of a...
Yeah, well, look, we've known the issues for a long time. A lot of the issues aren't new. Whether it's tax, whether it's FinReg, whether it's payments, or AML, CTF, a lot of these risks have been present. And I think in this room we've dealt with probably all of those. But we can't tackle them all at once. There's been a very long road to reform. Before I was really even that prominent in, these circles, I knew reform was happening. Like the first exposure I had was in 2017 in the ATO, and I'm like, yeah, cool, but I wasn't that interested at the time. It was only a bit later where I got a lot more heavily involved as more matters came through. But like, this fight's been happening since 2009 when Bitcoin started, and the issues were there, and the issues still remain in systems. In these systems, they have flaws, and they have for a long time, fractional banking, etc. That means that people want to exchange stuff, but just like my beer's going up to $100, my $1 AUD goes down to 10 cents. Like, that's a lower risk of that happening, but it did happen when we had major failures. Not in Australia, thankfully.
I think less. I think that it's all about the time. The time value of money is really what we're talking about, and that's stability. So if we're looking at what are the issues and what are the barriers to actually using this, let's say, as a means of payment, then we're actually talking not just about digital assets. We're talking about payments as a whole. And I think your point about, systems and what are the fundamental systems that make up our economy, then you're not just looking at, digital assets. You're looking at payment systems, you're looking at financial markets. And when you're looking at clearing and settlement systems, which run across both of those. Yeah. And the risks that you have when you talk about systemic risks aren't about, even consumers losing out, which is horrific. And I think it's really important that is front and center of the reforms. And we see that across not just digital assets and payments, but across all financial services and across a lot of wider reforms, including things like privacy. But what we're really talking about is not just what happens when one business goes under. What happens when there's a contagion effect, when multiple in a particular industry go down? What happens to the systems that underpin that? And how do we preserve it so that we don't all go to canned food and shotguns? And there are a number of different players that are involved. And when you're looking at new technology, you actually start to have to see the role that the technology has in protecting the system and the role of rules around that technology to protect the system. Now, we've gone way away from this whole discussion around payments and digital assets. But why it's important is when we get to that next phase of the industry, when we're not just talking about Bitcoin and beer, when we're talking about tokenized financial products running on financial markets that have elements of decentralized infrastructure, then we are in a very different world. Then you're looking at the fundamental systems that make up our financial structure and our economy. That's really cool. Yeah. And that's actually where, if you look at the discussions that are happening, even around the ETFs, Larry Fink from BlackRock actually said, when he was talking about the ETF, it's a stepping stone. And it's a stepping stone to tokenization. And it's not about tokenization of another form of NFT. It's actually tokenization of those traditional products that are our traditional financial products in our financial markets, and that next wave of innovation in financial market infrastructure.
Yeah. Yeah, that's absolutely fascinating. It's such a good point. I guess it's kind of the challenge for everyone in, I guess, the digital asset sort of industry is sort of going, hey, look, here's where we need to go to. If you look at it where it is now, it's not everything it could be, but the potential is kind of, we need to look where it's going. So I guess my question would be, in an ideal world, and you can kind of call the shots and do whatever you like, what things do you think need to happen to get us to where we need to go as quickly as possible?
It's a hard question. I don't actually know what I want. I have to think about that. It takes clarity. It takes industries working together. We've had a disjointed discussion between industry bodies, blockchain developers themselves, who actually build a lot of these systems without regard to regulation, because that was kind of the initial point, and it's falling away more and more. But as the industries sort of move closer together, they have to actually work together. So when we're talking about tokenization, we're really talking securitization, which means we're using blockchain and we're using financial products and we're linking them together and we're interacting with regulation, and it's all got to talk together. In a perfect world, those conversations will be free-flowing and relatively efficient, because right now they're very, very inefficient. It's taking a very long time to get things done. I'm happy some things are getting done, but the right people aren't talking to the other right people. So the separation in communities, even stuff like the Bitcoin maxis, they just want to talk about Bitcoin. It's like, well, that doesn't really help. They've got to talk about all the stuff around it. Just like how governments may want to talk about consumer safety, but that means they have to talk about payment systems, which means they have to talk about consumers want to use crypto. How do they do that safely? They actually all link together. Unfortunately, you can't change one thing without changing everything else. It's going to have a cause and effect. So when those conversations aren't happening in the same room is when it takes too long. And that is the one thing that needs to change. And it is changing slowly. The attitudes are changing. And once they start doing that, I think it'll be a little bit better, a little bit faster. I think that's all I can hope for.
Yeah. Hey, what about you, Hannah? What would you do?
I'm going to say two things. One of them is piggybacking off what you said, which I think we need people to focus on solving problems. And by that, I mean, focus on what you are actually doing, as opposed to people saying, well, I'm a dev and this is how the law works. And we need to leverage those areas of expertise that everyone has in this industry, and to know that we don't know each other's area of expertise, but we have so many experts in this space that that collaboration is fundamentally important. And I think if we do that, but again, solve the problem. Stop saying the regulation is X, so I'm going to try and create a product to get around the regulation. No, what's the problem you're solving? If that means the regulation is X, and you're going to have to create this other sort of add-on monstrous thing to try and get around it, well, why don't you actually just go through it and work out, how do we deal with that? Now, the industry is starting to get there. There really has been a shift recently of people saying, tell me what I need to do, tell me how it works, and I'll do that. And that's really cool. And I think that's fundamentally important, because people are going, what am I building? What's the problem I'm solving? Let's do that. The other thing I think we need is stablecoins. And I know there are stablecoins that are out there. But I actually mean true stablecoins. Yeah. And the reason why is because the great sort of benefit of this, if we're going back to that smart contract discussion, is the ability to embed the means of making payment into the actual contract itself. And for that to happen, you need to be able to have the means of making payment talk to the actual the subject matter of the contract itself. That means that they need to be two systems that work intertwined and that have automatic systems which have predefined terms and give predefined results. We need to be able to trust that that works. Now, we can say we have some incredible systems when it comes to payments. We have in Australia the NPP, which is phenomenal. But it doesn't have the same degree of programmability necessarily as you might have in a full contract. There is a lot that can be done in the systems that we have, particularly in Australia, and we are incredibly advanced. If we were talking in the US, we'd be saying, well, actually, we just need to change the entire system because it doesn't quite work. We are very sophisticated here. But if you want to say, well, let's look at that next layer, let's push this to the nth degree of how do we, if you're talking about, say, actual securitization or a deal for securitization of debt, let's say, in the traditional financial services world, well, you're going to need to actually have a means whereby you trigger the payment through the entry into the contract. That then flows from the multiple providers of that syndicated facility into the bank account of the person who's actually receiving that debt. You then have an ability to manage this all within that system and then make the payments through that money. Now, this probably sounds a bit pie in the sky. That was Project Atom. So Project Atom was the Reserve Bank of Australia's wholesale central bank digital currency trial. And what they did with that, and I was part of that trial process, was actually looking at how can you connect a central bank digital currency with a syndicated facility agreement to manage the life cycle of that loan. And if you look at what happened there, when that was the precursor to the stablecoin pilot projects and the CBDC pilot projects last year, it's all about how do you facilitate delivery versus payment? How do you facilitate making sure that the means of payment can be connected to the actual means purpose for which that payment is being used? And solving that, I think, is going to take this industry to the next level. Now, you're going to tell me we have stablecoins already, but I think there is probably a difference between the stablecoins that we have and the stablecoins that we will have, because what we have and how they're structured, when you dig beneath the surface, may not necessarily provide you with the same certainty that is required to actually run a financial system that relies on money, because at the heart of everything we do is money.
Yeah. We've seen stablecoin collapses and the devastation that follows. If we had a 5 cent DPEG on a stablecoin, and there's been some FUD on even on large stablecoins, and it's affected the price, 1 or 2 cents, and that's been a bit scary. And if they're that vulnerable,
massive move.
It's a massive move.
Like 1 or 2 cents in a currency.
Yeah, is huge. And like that itself could have brought down the system, but it seemed to maintain itself in those cases. But if we can't be certain that's not going to happen because of external factors, then we've got too much of a risk to really build anything too sophisticated. And then that's what you're getting at, I think.
Totally.
Yeah.
But I think if you say, well, 1 or 2 cents almost brought down that system, but it was kind of fine. We can't have kind of fine.
Then you can buy 98 cents and make it 2 cents.
Which is great if you're a speculator, but not great if you're running your
for
entire economy.
Yes.
That's a great point.
But we actually have reforms that are coming into place for stablecoins, and that the payments reforms are actually looking at bringing stablecoins into our payments reform so that they can actually be used in the same way that we use other sorts of stored value facilities. That's still being worked through as to how that will work, but I think that's going to be a really interesting development, as well as central bank digital currencies. And these are projects that aren't just Australia specific. You've got central bank digital currency projects in Japan, Singapore, Malaysia, I think even South Africa. The US has had various inquiries into this. And then obviously the UK is a huge one, as well as Canada over the years has also been looking at this. So there are a number of places around the world, and those projects are actually all being orchestrated. A lot of them are through the central bodies where all of these central banks work together, being IOSCO and the Bank of International Settlements. So what we're actually seeing is this confluence of digital assets, payments, and actually the use of different forms of infrastructure to change the way that we make payments going forward. As you can tell, I find it quite cool.
I take it you like payments.
A little bit. But I like it because of what we can do with it. Yeah. Because it's not just about, nerding out over what, I get to use this cool new system. It's actually about what does this mean when we are making payments.
Yeah. Because it sounds so simple, but it's not. And if buying the beer is not simple.
Yes.
No.
We've discovered that. No.
And then when it's not just beer, it's I'm funding the building of a building.
Yeah.
It's even more complex, and it's how do we make that work?
Hannah, you clearly have an exceptionally good picture in your mind about how this all works and the issues. When you're dealing with, I guess the banks are going to be really important to this. How do you distill that and make it sort of, for someone who's not from the industry or not familiar with the tech, how do you sort of boil that all down? And so when you're talking with the bank or something like that, to go, hey, here's the simplified version. Here's why you should be doing it.
Don't mention blockchain. Don't mention token.
Right.
Yep.
Seriously. It's the whole idea that if we're thinking about blockchain specifically and digital assets as an underlying technology to facilitate similar sorts of use cases, but with added functionality, what are the use cases? What's the functionality? It also means you cannot say, we're going to use blockchain. And I think there have been projects over the years that have fallen over because of that.
Really? Blockchain's such a dirty word that they look past the tech, go, well, blockchain, because of the preconceived ideas? Why do you think that is?
Oh, I don't think it's a dirty word at all. I think it's actually about being clear that you're always using the right technology. It's the same thing with AI. It's not saying we're using AI. It's actually going, what is the problem with, what's the problem we're solving?
Yeah.
Focus on solving the problem, work out the right tech to use it, and probably the right combination of technologies.
You think like a lawyer, Hannah, if I might say. You get the problem and then you solve it. That's how it goes. But the banks, I've had my personal gripes with the banks, as I ventured to you the other day, Lee, I think. But yeah, mentioning blockchain, I think it is a dirty word. In terms of retail banking, I've had immense troubles. Clients that I've assisted to get banking outside of Australia, even that's hard enough. In Australia, it's basically off the table, unless you're very sophisticated. We've had so many troubles, but I haven't seen it on the tech side, like on the payment system side. But the evolution of utility of blockchain is you're using it, but you don't know. It doesn't get its value that it's blockchain. It gets value because it solves the problem. That's primarily the thing here. Whether it's distributed ledger or not, doesn't matter. It matters if that tech is required to solve the problem. But yeah, the banks have been a little bit reluctant to engage in that. And I think it will bite them, just like the neobanks overtook a lot of the regular banks in various spaces and they're trying to catch up. They laughed at all the neobanks and they said, what are these people doing? And then the neobanks started hitting some really, really big goals. And then the bank said, we'll start our own neobanks. But they were a bit too late. And so we've got to motivate them. We've got to help them through the process.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, I'm not necessarily certain that the neobanks have hit every goal.
Oh, not every goal, but they started kicking some goals out.
I think a lot of them are quite connected to the banks now and have actually been bought by them for various different reasons. I think if you're looking at, the role of banks, I think banks play a fundamental role in our society. That's not going to change. And if you're looking at how the two fit together in terms of new technologies, Australian banks are actually pretty good.
Yeah.
The fact that we have an app on our phones that we can use to send money to one another instantly.
It's like Venmo, but better. Yeah.
And because it's actually the money straight from your bank account.
Yeah.
And that's awesome. That is a significant improvement on many other places around the world. I think also that kind of shows that there is a bit more of an entrepreneurial aspect to how we make payments. And Australia as a country is really high up that learning curve. We don't seem to like using cash anymore. It keeps on declining. We have a proposal to phase out checks. We don't have a proposal to phase out cash, and that's because it still is fundamentally...
There's a very loud group of people who really, really want cash. I do think they're very much in the minority, though.
Yeah, but I think if you're out in the bush and dealing with bushfires and internet outages, you kind of might need it.
Yeah. It's important, but we moved away from 90% cash to 90% payment systems. 100% is probably not possible.
No.
What do you think?
But I think what we're then talking about is, well, what's the mix of that?
Yeah.
And we have all sorts of different types of payment. We have, if you think about the different types of money, you've got money that sits in an exchange settlement account, which is what's the money that a bank has with the Reserve Bank, and how is that used to settle the payments, actually make the payments between the different banks when you're actually we're paying one another, that actually gets settled at the bank level. that's money, that's Aussie dollars. We have money that sits in our account, which is commercial money. That's actually technically the money puts a claim on the bank. We still have notes and coins. Those are technically a claim on the Reserve Bank, but these are all Aussie dollars. They're different forms of Aussie dollars. The idea behind a central bank digital currency has always been it's another form of money. What that form takes and the different models around that is where the discussions happen. But it's just, what are the different forms of money? And then you get into what's the different ways of making payments. And the reason why notes and coins are different is because it's the relationship between the person holding it and the central bank, as opposed to the money that's in your bank account, which is the relationship with the person who has the bank account and the bank.
It's a contractual debt relationship, is that right?
Yeah, so it's typically a debt.
The show's in action.
Yeah.
Some sort of debt.
But we're getting super technical here. Wow, this is
your own fault for getting 2 lawyers.
yeah. We're way beyond tokenization, and like we haven't even touched on DAOs or even some of the recent cases and DeFi.
No, we haven't. We do have to jump into that. I know the block earner, I guess, result has been probably the biggest talking point in crypto. So do you guys want to throw your 2 cents in on what that is and what that kind of means for the industry?
I'll make some general comments because Hannah's the expert.
Pressure.
It's one of the very first times that the rubbers hit the road on law firms giving advice and ASIC saying no, we don't agree, and ASIC won. Spoiler for anybody who hadn't read the case. And that there's quite a long delay in that happening in any industry. You know, I've seen legal firms start, give a bunch of crappy advice, and 10 years later they get in lots of trouble, and then they give back their practicing certificates. That's not going to happen here. Look, this was very borderline stuff. Some law firms agreed with the position that ASIC had, others didn't. But now we have some actual law. The rubber has certainly hit the road, and we have something, and ASIC finally has a nice win on the board. ASIC, who has a bit of a mixed record in litigation, but generally successful. But some other organisations are much, much more successful. They've said cryptocurrency is a focus area and has been for a long time. And I think the commissioners all lay awake at night thinking about Bitcoin. But they're starting to get more engaged, I think, and understand the products, because these products all kind of appeared at once, and and ASIC kind of scared everybody.
Gotcha.
And here we are. We finally have a decision, and we have some binding law information.
So for people not super familiar with it, can you quickly outline exactly, I guess, what the point of contention is? The resolution?
I think Hannah should. I'm just a tax guy, mate. This is real law.
What? Ball goes over the court. Okay, all right. So basically, you're right. This is the first time that we've actually got a judgment in Australia around not really what a crypto asset is, but a product that relates to crypto assets. Now, the big thing here is basically, do our existing financial services laws apply to a product that is made available that runs on DeFi rails? So ASIC brought a case against Web3 Ventures, Block Earner, in relation to 2 products that they offer. One is Earner, which is a DeFi product where you can give Block Earner your money and burn yield, sort of return. And the other one was Access, which is a similar sort of product, except it was structured slightly differently, so that there wasn't a case of you giving your money to Block Earner and holding it and then processing it through the protocol. It was actually about providing a clearer line of sight between the money that you provided to Block Earner and actually access to that DeFi protocol.
So it was Aave, wasn't it? Yeah, that they put it on.
Exactly. So the first product is called Earner. The second product is called Access. And ASIC brought a case saying, we think that both of these are a whole lot of different forms of financial products. Now, for those of you not familiar with the Australian regime, that's kind of like saying, we think they're a security. If you're in US land, we think it's a security or it's a derivative. Now, ASIC actually said, we think, and ASIC is our securities regulator, but sort of like if you're in the US, you've got the SEC and the CFTC. ASIC is kind of both. And so they brought the case saying, we think it's a financial product And within that, we actually think it is likely to be or either a managed interest in a managed investment scheme, which is kind of like that general security definition, or collective investment scheme if you're somewhere like Singapore. Or it could be a general facility through which you make a financial investment, which is a bit more of a broader category. Or it could be a derivative. And then if it's an interest in a managed investments, and then if it is one of those, we think you're providing a whole raft of financial services in relation to that particular product. ASIC won in relation to earner. They didn't necessarily in relation to access. And the reason why I say not necessarily is because there are what the judgment does really well, and it's actually quite easy to read, even for non-lawyers out there, is it goes through how Justice Jackman actually applies the existing law to the products that were made available. And they look through what is the product, what are the terms, what are the other representations that were made available around the product. And that's fundamentally
It's like the advertising and the communications.
Yeah. What does it say on your website? Yeah. And it says, as a result of all of this taken into account, what would someone believe when they are actually acquiring this product? And how does that fit against our definitions of managed investment scheme, facility through which you make a financial investment, and derivative? And then as a result of that, what was Web3 Ventures or Block Owner actually doing in relation to that? And it was found that the earner product was a managed investment scheme, and that Block Owner had contravened our financial services laws by failing to have a financial services license. They'd also failed to, because it's a managed investment scheme that was made available to more than 20 retail people, mums and dads, everyone unless you have above a certain number of assets and all sorts of other tests. Though that meant that it needed to be registered, and they didn't do that. These are two pretty fundamental things to have breached within our corporation's law. This isn't small fry. We don't have a penalties hearing yet or anything like that, but what we're actually seeing is a clear statement that our existing financial services already apply to the products.
I think ASIC's been saying that for a long time.
They have, but I think there's a difference between a regulator saying it and a court saying it.
Exactly.
And what's really cool from an industry perspective is it also means that from a lawyer's perspective is we now have a leg to stand on when people, we always had a leg to stand on, but maybe scratch that, it's actually slightly easier to turn around and say, this is what the law is. The law already exists. The law already applies. It's flexible. It's principles-based. It looks through the tech.
Yeah.
And think about everything that you say. And I think that's where the really fundamental point here is.
Yeah.
The other thing is, this is the first in a series of cases that ASIC is bringing.
So are there other products that are being tested? Like, is it the Finder one as well that they had a case against?
Yes, they've got another. I think they've got 3 other cases.
Yeah, okay.
And they're all looking at slightly different products.
Well, it's excellent for clarifying those things, and this is part of what the regulator needs to do. And I think you were saying it makes your job easier, because the regulator, like, if you say to a client you need to get an AFSL and you need to register your MIS, and they say, well, why? And you go, well, that's what everybody says it means. They go, well, there's no case law on it. Like, I've had clients say this to me, and you go, well, not yet. Do you want to be the test case? And some people get in line, and other people just say, well, we're not going to do it till someone else does. Like, does it help to tell the clients that, like, no, it is a regulated product, because they're quite general?
I mean, look, we've sort of been saying that for a while in relation to, and I don't say, everything is a financial product. I say that in the sense of,
I thought everything's an MIS. I thought that was the financial services joke. Yeah.
Well, that was one of the things that people have said. And that's part of the problem, is it's not everything's an MIS or everything's a financial product. It's everything depends on its facts.
Yeah.
What are the facts? How do they work? Where do you go to work out those facts? So that's, I think, where this is really helpful, is it clarifies that it's not just the terms, it's not just how it works technologically, it's also what you say. We've got all three of those were relevant. It's also saying, and this is how you apply it. And to be fair, this is what happens in traditional financial services too.
Yeah.
And I think from our perspective, it also kind of helps because it means, when someone comes to us and says, oh, but these guys down the road aren't doing it, so I don't want to, we kind of go, well, we don't comment on what other people are doing.
Yeah.
You've got to, this is our view. That's our advice.
Yeah.
But it's kind of, I think it's, as I said before, there's already a shift in the market of people saying, what is it? What do I need to do? How do I meet my obligations? And this is just another way of saying we're kind of going down that road.
Yeah, right. So safe to say we've got more cases coming through, but it's a kind of a good thing, even though we have to go through this kind of ugly process. It does provide clarity, which is going to be good for everyone going forward. Is that a fair way to put it?
It provides clarity. It also provides consumer protection.
Yeah.
Because
that's the whole basis of the licensing regime, isn't it? Is regulating products to protect consumers so we can't have nonsense. And there's a lot of nonsense in crypto.
Yeah.
And they don't have AFSLs.
We're cleaning it up bit by bit.
We're doing our bit.
Hey, Hannah, in preparation for today, I know you were very, very keen to say, Lee, can you give me some detailed stuff to speak through? And I said, no, I'm pretty sure your general knowledge is going to be enough here, Hannah. So if you had have actually done research, your knowledge probably would have taken us for the next 3 hours. But we don't. Unfortunately, we probably have to wrap it up somewhere. JT, we haven't heard a word from you. We've just been letting
absorbing.
I've just been sitting here and letting the guests articulate very well-informed thoughts today on the potty. That's been great.
Absolutely. But before we let you guys loose on the world again, we have to get your crystal balls. That came out horrible, but we have to get your crystal ball predictions.
Of course, mate.
Where the market is and where we're going. We've just seen Bitcoin. I guess the ETF news is still really relevant. We're at 52,000 as of today. I presume, already. I know we've talked away from Bitcoin a lot today, but all roads do lead back to Bitcoin.
Yeah, so yes, they do.
Halving is coming around the corner. Can I tempt you guys into a prediction of where things are going to be over the next 18 months?
After talking about market value, I'm certainly not the expert on that, but I do think it's that same idea of it's not just about ETFs and crypto, it's digital assets and where do we go with tokenization. And I think that's the really exciting bit.
Yep, absolutely, Harry.
But is the market going to go up or down?
Is the market going to go up? Sure,
dodging the question.
If you're asking your lawyer that question,
I know you guys got to keep it off back-faced. Harry, we're going to get what about you? Can we get a bold prediction from you?
Yes, sorry, I just dropped my microphone. I think market's going to go down.
What?
Yeah, I think everyone's too excited and, buy the rumor, sell the news, mate. The news is coming in hot and fast. We're all expecting the halving. I'm saying that it's priced in.
That's controversial. Okay.
I'm a controversial guy.
Come on, you guys are the markets people.
We're here to hear your takes on this.
Today I wrote about...
Then you can put it up when the halving happens and be like, look at this idiot. Yeah.
We'll be wheeling about it, Harry, don't worry.
Today I wrote about the supply side differences between the Bitcoin ETF and Bitcoin as a product and gold as a product. And quite interestingly, we talk about some sort of economic profit which comes about through a traditional commodities focus where, when you have positive economic profit, then the supply side will increase and naturally the production side of the commodity will balance out the demand side. So supply increases if there's money on the table, supply meets demand, and the price will sort of nicely and neatly move higher with respect to demand, but the supply side is very much driven by the producer. And that's the gold-based ETF. And it's been interesting in the public media that people have been talking about a gold-based ETF with respect to the Bitcoin ETF. What we discussed today and what I wrote about today is purely the supply side of Bitcoin, and it is very much set by the protocol. And if there is economic profit between halving events, it goes to the miners, and the miners have their own economic profit cycle, but that is completely agnostic and independent of what Bitcoin supply is. And I think that's a very interesting and very critical detail, which potentially the broader media is missing when they're trying to align a gold-based ETF with a Bitcoin-based ETF.
The supply side, it's in the economics of the miners.
The economics of the supply side and the economic of the miner is completely different. So
it's really interesting. I haven't heard that before.
So the framework is very set, and the supply side is very set in a Bitcoin-based ETF, whereas a usual production cycle, and the supply side is set by economic profit. Something to look into.
Yep. And
Interesting with ETH ETFs as well.
Absolutely. I think critically for the market, whether an ETH ETF can be brought up to speed by something like May, the market's suggesting a 50-50 chance. We look at the FBTC ratio as being probably the best indicator of market expectation as to what the market's thinking around that relationship. And when I was sitting in the corner here and the two legal experts were speaking so eloquently, I was trying to absorb more from an understanding where there is no yield and earn product on Bitcoin. So the collateralization tends to happen between Bitcoin and ETH, and that ETH product then gets lent out, and there is the lineage between the FBTC relationship. So then if we look to an extension of that and an ETH-based ETF, what does that look like and how does that redefine the market? I think that's going to be really critical and really interesting going forward for the next 6 months.
Can I ask you a question, JT?
Absolutely.
What comes after the ETF? What's next?
Yeah.
Quickly, I know.
That's going to be the challenge, I think, for the market, because it isn't broadly defined. The market has this expectation that there's been an integration between cryptocurrencies and traditional financial markets through the Bitcoin ETF. And then the lineage is quite clear that the SEC came out and said that Bitcoin and ETH both aren't securities. Yep. And so the market immediately leans into ETH being the next iteration of what could possibly be
the natural progression.
The natural progression from an ETF. I guess we then go back to the guidance of what isn't a financial, what isn't a security.
Yep.
And then that will excite the market, I guess, next.
I think it is.
If they might be able to qualify for what is quite a stringent requirement to be able to list an ETF.
Yeah.
Before we go, we have to get the details. How do people get in touch with you, Harry? And how do people get in touch with you, Hannah? If you want them to, of course.
If you don't want them to, you can give them a fake email.
You can always, I'm on the King of Wood Mallesons website, and that's where my email and contact details are, but I'm on LinkedIn. I occasionally am on Twitter, or X as it now is, but LinkedIn's probably the best way to contact me.
Me, alternatively, I'm actually like a weed, so you'll have trouble avoiding me. So I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on TikTok, I'm on Instagram, I'm on Twitter. I'm everywhere, so you can't avoid me. But my website is cadenalegal.com.au, and I write some good stuff, mostly about crypto, but sometimes other stuff.
Like tax,
yeah.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. That was very impressive. The level of understanding and depth of history you have with the industry is just fantastic. So thank you for sharing.
My pleasure, and thank you for finding me on the street so I could appear.
Thank you so much. I think we could have talked for hours, and we didn't even get into things like layer ones, layer twos.
We'll have you back. We've got lots to cover.
Yeah, lots to cover. We can come back every week, mate, if you need.
You come off the street?
Yeah. When I'm here.
That was good.
Independent Reserve, the trusted cryptocurrency exchange.